Right, good morning everyone and welcome to the next in our series of webinars here at Ask4. So this morning we are talking about having a discussion about different technologies and GPON versus Ethernet in the purpose-built student accommodation and build-to-rent arena. I'm welcome today my two colleagues here. I have got Pete Marshall, who's our Head of Technology. He's going to be taking on the role of the expert here and hopefully enlightening us all about what's going on and the differences between the two different technologies. And I also have got Adam Newton, who is one of our client account managers and who is going to take the role of the client advocate and also just bring to us some of the questions that we are asked in our day-to-day roles, talking to our clients and in the marketplace. Just to give you a quick introduction about myself, I've only been with Ask4 for a couple of months now, so I'm fairly new to the company, but I have a telecom background. I've been working in telecoms for about the last 20 years. So this is still new to me and I'm still learning lots, but I have a fairly good idea about the industry and where it all fits together. So anyway, I wanted to sort of really kick off and just also give you very quick minutes introductions to Ask4 as well. So we are a managed internet service provider into sort of managed buildings, really. So the purpose-built student accommodation and the build-to-rent properties as well, and also things that are coming through like co-living as well. We've been going for about 20 years now, so we've got quite a lot of experience and we've built up over the years since we started when back, we all had rubbish dial-up internet and things like that, and we've evolved with the industry as well. So moving on to today's topic, we're talking about GPON versus Ethernet. Let's start with the basics. Let's give everyone the basics of here. So Pete, over to you really, and can you explain what the two different technologies are and how they're used in the context really in this arena?
Morning Claire, morning everyone else. Thanks for the introduction. We're talking about GPON versus Ethernet. It's not a competition, it's just a description of either one. But essentially, as far as the context we're talking about, which is purpose-built and multi-accommodation for different living, they're both types of cabling within a building to deliver connectivity as far as we're concerned. They both need different types of supporting equipment, switches or ONTs and OLTs, they're called for GPON. While we're on the subject of GPON, it stands for Gigabit Passive Optical Network. And the interesting points in there are the gigabit points and the passive points. We'll come on to talk a bit more in detail about what they're for. But it is interesting and worth pointing out that in its original form, GPON was designed for citywide deployments. It's carrier grade stuff that a carrier would use to wire up a city essentially, or a village, or even a campus to that level. It's got much longer. You can run it over longer distances than Ethernet essentially without any losses so that's what it's originally designed for. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about how it's used within multi-use, multi-living buildings such as student accommodation or what we call build-to-rent (BTR), which is apartments and things like that. Now, the thing that we will say is when we say it's an Ethernet versus GPON or vice versa, as far as Ask4 are concerned, all of our services run exactly the same over both. If you're a user of one of our end users in a building, you won't know necessarily which one the building has unless there's been, some upfront marketing about it. So there's nothing that we can do over one that we can't do over the other. That's it in a nutshell.
So I suppose it's worth, and you mentioned it's worth just clarifying in the context of this discussion, we are talking about GPON versus Ethernet in a multi-tenanted building arena like PBSA or BTR rather than the citywide or town-wide, I suppose, context that it was originally made for. So obviously we've had, over the last couple of years, many people inquiring about GPON. What makes GPON, I suppose, an interesting prospect for developers and operators?
Yeah, in this context, if you're a developer and operator of multi-use building or a portfolio of them, one of the things GPON has been marketed as fast and future-proof, and we'll discuss that a bit more later on. But So that you know, it's a good marketing tool to have GPON in your building, essentially. Now, every operator and developer wants the best marketing tools to get the people in, so this is a good stamp to have on. It's also seen throughout the industry and throughout the media as well as the popular way to deliver internet, because most of the large ISPs, all of the large ISPs say fiber, you must have fiber. Fiber being the passive optical network part of it, it being gigabit or not is neither here nor there, because most ISPs don't give you gigabit these days. So, but it is pushed as the fastest delivery method. And when you're an ISP, when you're saying fiber, you're generally talking about the way GPON was designed, which is GPON to a city. So they put fiber to the cabinets, and then they'll put something else into your house, copper or coax. Increasingly, they put fiber into the house as well, but not all of them do that. All of the big ones, the big players, don't put fiber directly into your room, despite the fact they're selling you fiber. So it's been pushed by the media and the ISPs as fiber is best. As I said before, in this context, when you're in a building, we're in a building now, I'm connected, I don't know whether we've got fiber into this room or not. Doesn't really bother me as long as it works. So, and that's the thing with Ask4 is, because we're a managed service provider, we give a service. The service is you will get, you know, this speed, this package and stuff like that. And then it's irrespective of the technology to get there. So the reason that, to go circle a bit back, the reason why it's an interesting prospect develops in the context, fast and future-proof, and it's marketed as the fastest way to deliver internet, which is always very appealing as buzzwords.
Definitely, that's very much the case. And I'm just going to interject here. Sorry, I forgot to mention at the big start of the webinar that if anyone has any questions, if you could just pop them in the Q&A box, then we will come to those at the end. And we'd love to have some questions in from the audience. So anything you want to ask us, please just drop a message in there, and we'll pick up on that at the end. So that's it. So going back onto topic again now, Pete. So talking about this, what would you say the main benefits of a GPON deployment are? Why would someone go down that route in the building infrastructure? Well,
interesting enough, the benefits of GPON, as far as I'm concerned, are mainly for the carrier grade stuff. So why would someone want it in the building? We've talked about the future proofing. So the thought is, if you get fiber in the building, it's future proofed. It can take all of the future technologies. Now, it's interesting to note that the current GPON that is deployed most places is called GPON. It has a 2.5 gigabit down speed and a 1.2 gigabit up speed, which sounds great, but don't forget that in a building that's split between people. So it's comparable to an Ethernet line coming in, an Ethernet of 1 or 10 gig running around the property. There are some more iterations of GPON that are out and are coming along. XGPON and XGS-PON and NG-PON2, and they go all the way up to 40 gigabits down and 10 gigabits up at the latest iteration. And it's worth remembering that if you're a building infrastructure, looking after the infrastructure, the fibers that you put in can support all of those technologies, and they can support them all at the same time because they're on different frequencies. The light wavelengths are different frequencies, so you don't have to replace the cabling. However, the endpoint equipment, the things called ONTs, OLTs, line cards, and potentially splitters as well, dependent on the way that it's designed, will need to be replaced. So there's the future proofing of the sort of physical cabling, but not necessarily the endpoints. So it's a consideration when you build the buildings. Obviously, at the moment, if you put decent Ethernet cabling in a building, you can run up to 10 gigs anyway. So that gets you a good long way. So it's not necessarily correct that future proofing is one of them, but you can see just the edge there. Another possible benefit that you get is, and this, as I said, will come on to something else when I talked about GPON, the passive bit, the P in GPON. Now, obviously, Ethernet's active. You're running electrical signals up and down switches and wires. GPON is passive, so it just uses light. So it should lose less power. You should use less power when you're transmitting along. Now, it's not always the case, and it depends on the number of components you need. Splitters, they split off the light, and you can only split so many times in a building. And also the endpoint components, there's a piece of equipment that terminates the GPON connection, and then from then you would traditionally need a Wi-Fi access point in the building as well, in the apartment, so because that's the way that the things are stacked up. So it may be that you've got to power those things. In Ethernet, in our Ethernet deployments, we use power over Ethernet. So you plug the device in, and generally it takes the power from the Ethernet, from the switch. Whereas if you're using a passive connection, there is no electricity coming down, just light. So you need to then have some sort of local power for the terminating device and or the Wi-Fi device. So I think when doing the designs, it's worth looking into, are we actually using less power or are we not? So it's a potential for using less power. And I think the main benefit of GPON, as far as I've seen in this scenario, is space, strangely enough. When you have an Ethernet deployment, you have switches in a comms room, and in a fairly large building, which most of the sites that we deal with are, you have sub-comms rooms where you have more switches. And these are, a reasonable size. They're usually air-conditioned, hopefully, to keep the switches nice and cool. But with the GPON equivalent, you have line cards, and then you have some splitters, which are very small, and you have the equipment in the apartment or cluster of apartments. So you don't need a sub-comms room. And that releases physical space in the building, especially when you're doing the design. And the developer may put that space to better use. And I think that's something that some of our developers have put some serious thought into, as to whether it's actually better for them to use the building space a bit more efficiently.
Okay, I think that's a really useful, a really important point, I think, for a lot of developers and operators. I mean, you think about space and the cost of space in a central London building, for example. We think, actually, right, if we can get rid of a couple of sub-comms rooms, and we can get a couple of more bedrooms in there, studios in there, straight away you're going to increase the amount of revenue that comes in every year and increase the value of the building. I suppose that's, it could be studios, it could be communal spaces, it could be absolutely anything. But thinking overall, it sounds very much like the GPON versus Ethernet. It's actually, you need to have a good look at your building, you need to plan properly, and for some buildings, GPON might be the better option, and for some buildings it might be the other way. Is that kind of what you would say, Pete?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that with a supplier like Ask4, we don't say, oh, you must have Ethernet, you must have GPON. It's a case of, what do you want? You want GPON? Great, fine. Let's do a design with you. And we generally will do a complementary Ethernet design, just to give you a flavor of, this is what it would look like with Ethernet for space and price, because price is always an interesting thing to think about. And also with future-proofing, cabling and things like that. So I think if you're building a brand new building, then, let's have a think about whether we should be putting GPON in it. If it's an older building you're refitting, then if you've already got the some comms rooms, it might not be so economically practical to switch to GPON. But again, there's the other side where some developers say, no, we want the word GPON because it's the fast, future-proof. It's a very good marketing rubber stamp that gets people through the door. And ultimately, you want to get people through the door. So, we'll sell you either, obviously. Adam will sell you either. As will Claire. That's what it's a problem. So, yeah, like you said, if, rent space is at a premium and you want to, cram it in like you're in London or somewhere like that, then it might make much more sense to GPON for, for the prestige and also for the, the actual revenue return, dependent on the cost.
Yeah. Okay. So I think probably moving, I think another comment we've heard is GPON can pose less of a fire risk than Ethernet. Is that true?
Well, it's interesting because obviously with bits of metal, copper cables wrapped in plastic around your building, that can burn. GPON being passive is fibers, also wrapped in plastic actually. So the thought is that maybe because they're passive and not active, you've got less chance of a fire. But it's interesting, if you're building a building, you will know that any cabling you put in has to meet the fire standards and building regs. So if one was more preferable than the other, then it would have a higher standard, which, you know, they're all similar standards. So I think I mean, technically, theoretically, it might be more fireproof, but when it comes down to, you know, the fire standards, as long as you've got the right cabling in, you'll meet the regulations, and you'll not see any sort of benefit there.
I think that's very true, isn't it? And it's something that everyone's very aware of, and has been over the last couple of years, and rightly so, really, isn't it? That the importance of fire safety within buildings it's critical and it's important. And it's, you know, it is one interesting point that can be one of those points, you know, where there is a bit of a confusion about sometimes the different cabling types and what's better to go use in a building. So we sort of talked about some of the benefits of using a GPON solution. Are there any downsides to it at all? Are there any negative points that were people worth considering when they're deciding how to deploy?
Yes, unfortunately, or, you know, the way it is, the main one is cost. GPON is currently more expensive to put in a building than Ethernet. The cost of the equipment, as I said very early on in this webinar, it's carrier grade stuff. That's how it was designed. The market will come down as it gets, you know, more pervasive. But currently, it's really, you know, the top end people design it for people like, you know, the big ISPs, and that's the equipment that, you know, a lot of us tend to use when we're doing it in buildings, because it's reliable, it works, and it's, you know, it's a very small suppliers market at the moment. So it will generally cost more. Let's not beat about the bush. If you come for a quote, it will cost more to put GPON in than Ethernet. The other potential downside, if you like, is, it's not a downside, it's a sort of leveling up, is GPON isn't actually faster when you're in the building, mainly because the current speeds it runs at are comparable to Ethernet. And in the context that we flip back to the context of this multi-living student accommodation, everybody uses Wi-Fi. They don't use wired, they don't plug in. We're looking at our stats, over 90%, 95% plus, everything's Wi-Fi. I'm on Wi-Fi here. So Wi-Fi doesn't run anywhere near as fast as wired, as we know. We did a speed webinar earlier on. If you'd like to go check that out, that tells you the difference between 1 gig in the building and 1 gig around the building. And also there's a previous webinar that a guy called Jamie Wormsley that works for me, very intelligent guy, knows all about Wi-Fi, did about Wi-Fi and why it is as fast as it is and how it works. So if you think about the way that people connect to the internet, because that's what this is all about, most of them use Wi-Fi, which you don't need massive speeds for. I'm not going to go into why that is. As I say, we had another webinar. So it's not a downside of GPON. It just means it's actually arguably no better than Ethernet in the environments that we're talking about.
Okay. I suppose from a client's perspective, it's, and as for perspective, it very much sounds as though both Ethernet and GPON will both supply a good, reliable and fast service to the end users. I suppose which one the operators go with, I suppose it ultimately depends on cost versus benefit, and that's dependent on the design of the building and all of those variables that you get with PBSA and BTR buildings, because they all are extremely bespoke and they're all generally very different. Yeah, I suppose to reiterate the context a little bit as well, this is very much a discussion about PBSA, BTR, multi-tenanted buildings, rather than, I said, the original idea for GPON, which was a citywide, I suppose, deployment.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that the services we talk about are a managed service, as Claire said very early on. We, ask for in this context, provide internet connectivity to the whole building. So it's not like if you rent an apartment and then you, as an individual, get an ISP of your own, and they'll bring wires into your building, you know, or if there's like 5 different ISPs on the site and you can choose one of them that goes into your building. And then you might want to consider yourself, is one giving you better speeds and packages than the other, whereas the service that Ask4 provides to the developer is, or the operator owner is, what do you want? What speeds do you want to give to your users? What can they have as options? And we'll make sure that service is met, no matter what type of infrastructure you have, because it's all down to the way that we do the managed service. So in this context, it's the end user experience that we're really focusing on, so that we make sure that everybody gets what they signed up for.
I just thought there's one point as well which might be worth mentioning is that, you know, do you have to have a GPON network if you have fibre in a building?
Well,
is that something else to consider? Because I know maybe some people may already have a building with fibre in it. Do they have to? Would that automatically then be a GPON network in the building?
Well, no, it doesn't have to. If you think about, and anyone that knows switches and Ethernet, switches can run with fibre. Switches can have fibre ports on them, and they can also run with adapters in to run fibre. So sometimes, obviously, if you have the fibre from the internet service provider, the ISP will come into the building and then be connected, usually to copper around the building, but there's no reason you can't connect it to fibre, which would give you an interesting hybrid where you've got the future-proof cabling, if you like, but you're still using lower cost Ethernet equipment. Now, it may well be that, again, that's something that we would say, well, let's do a proper look at it, because it might not work out much cheaper. It might work out quite a bit cheaper. You'll still need subcoms rooms. And is the fibre topology you've already got in your building suitable for Ethernet? But if you're doing it brand new, you might think, well, I could have 2 bites at the cherry maybe and put in the Ethernet infrastructure with fibre, and then maybe move to GPON when it gets a bit more cost effective. I'll be honest and say it's not something we've actually done, because no one's really asked us about it. I think one of our developers, we gave that as an option to them, and they went the GPON because they wanted they had their own reasons for that, and that's fine. So we could do it. We could definitely do it if you look at data centers. If you've ever been in that industry, which I was, is all of their switches in the data center are connected together with fibers. So essentially, you've got fibers running through a data center with Ethernet switches. It's not GPON. So the technology exists.
I think it's one of those things, isn't it? It's at the moment, you know, there is lots of different ways really of skinning the cat, isn't it? There's lots of different ways of deploying a signal around the building. And I think from what I understand, stuff like that, it's very important that you have those conversations quite early on in the process. And you know, I think that's one thing that I've seen is Ask4 is really happy to have those open discussions with their clients and say, what works best for you in this situation, or what will work best for you, the end users in this situation? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are going to be using the internet, and they're the ones who, as we all know at home, you know, the internet is fine when it works well and everyone's happy and all that kind of thing. But as soon as there's a problem with the Wi-Fi or the internet connection, then that's when that's when we take notice of it, isn't it? It's always when it stops working. Yeah. So
there's one bit we didn't mention actually, which has popped into my head. These things do sometimes. When we talked about downsides of GPON, a potential downside is if you're running fibre around the building, you're running fibre to apartments. If a fibre cable has a problem, you may need a specialist to fix it rather than your local Ethernet engineer. I can crimp Ethernet cables, but I wouldn't attempt to do fibre cables, for instance. So, you know, there's potential maintenance things there. I know that we have multi-use buildings and we have connection points in every room. And let's be honest, sometimes the residents, be they students or whatever, don't necessarily look after the rooms as well as they might. And often we have to repair endpoints. And obviously with an Ethernet, it's potentially a less specialized service than with fiber. So, you know, there's maintenance things to consider. Again, as the industry moves on, that should be more common, etc., and it shouldn't be an issue. But it's worth when you're looking at a managed service and you're looking at various suppliers, Ask4 maybe one of them. What type of GPON equipment do you use? What type of fibers do you use? What, you know, are the fibers future-proof? They should be. Everyone should supply the right fibers, but make sure that, you know, the delivery method and the endpoints are secured properly as well. Such as if you just get a router from your ISP, plug it in at home, we all know they're not secure. And what do we offer? What does Ask4 offer? And again, that's all part of the managed service, I think, which will be fairly similar, whether it's Ethernet or GPON, but it's worth asking the right questions to see that, do people have a, Wi-Fi, wireless SLA as well, which Ask4 do, that we will always deliver what we said we're going to deliver.
Which is very, very important. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what we want, is all the happy clients at the end of it. One of these actually is this kind of, move this on to some of the questions that we've had a few pop into the question box here. And one of them, I think we've kind of covered this. It says, is there an eco benefit from using GPON over Ethernet due to the fact that it's passive? So
yeah, as I said, it should use less power than Ethernet, but it depends on your building configuration, really. On a smaller building, without many subcobs rooms, less switches, you'll probably find that Ethernet might be more expensive because of the power on the endpoints, rather than using the switch power. On a bigger building, you probably find that the GPON uses less power. But I think if I'm correct, and yeah, and at least one or two of our PEs, our project engineers, have done some studies on this, so they can give you the help if you come and say, well, I want to do a design in my building. They can look at what the power consumption is on the Ethernet infrastructure and what it would be on GPON, and say, well, yeah, you are saving power. Away you go. So yeah, the eco benefit would be the reduced power, but it's not as cut and dried as it might be.
So definitely one of those things to have a chat about and think about and consider, really, rather than...
I mean, ask your supplier for a comparison, if you like, and say, what power is it going to use? And then, if they can't tell you that, then, ask another supplier.
That's great, thank you. So I'm just going to have another one here. Another question that's come through is, it says, does GPON future-proof in the sense that it needs fewer upgrades? And this is something obviously that happens maybe through the life cycle of a building, is that cabling or equipment might be upgraded. So does that help with, is there less of that involved with a GPON solution? Well,
interestingly enough, if we flick back to Ethernet cabling, the standards have been very well defined over the years, and if we go 6A, I think is the current one that most people put in, and that will run speeds up to 10 gigs per person per connection. So usually the cabling isn't something you consider upgrading for at least 10 or 15 years at least. So we can put the cabling to one side. Now, the future proofing are the end points, and much like any other endpoint, it will deliver what it delivers when you buy it. Most Ethernet and GPON equipment runs at the speed it runs at. So if you want to go to the next speed up, the next standard, you will need to swap the infrastructure. Now, having said that, most of the infrastructure upgrades we see are generally Wi-Fi upgrades, because Wi-Fi moves on a pace. So it's all to be considered within the life cycle of the building, and also if you're a developer or an operator, the life cycle of your portfolio, because if you're keeping the buildings for a shorter period, then you need to maybe offset the potential cost of Ethernet against GPON, which one gives you the best return over that time cycle. And again, our account managers are all experts on helping customers with this and the contracts and how they get the best value. So I don't think it needs fewer upgrades. It needs a comparable number of upgrades, and you're looking at the endpoints, the Wi-Fi equipment usually. So the infrastructure is less of a concern. Arguably, you might swap the Ethernet cables a bit earlier, but you're still looking 10 years plus life cycle.
Yeah, this is actually kind of quite linked to the next question as well that we've had come through. So, which is, how do you deal with changes in technology and changing speed requirements from end users? So that's very much the same sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, as a managed service, I mean, all of the, for instance, if we flick back to Ethernet, all of the switches that we currently put in have the ability to run 10 gigs. So currently, Wi-Fi is not going to touch the sides on that at the moment. So basically, there's plenty of room there. So all of the new installs and the upgrades we do have the growth. Wi-Fi standards are generally, moving the pace. We're on Wi-Fi 6 now. 6E is coming later, and as I said, there is a Wi-Fi webinar that people can go look at. And we work on we plan the service to deliver the speeds required over the cycle of the contract, and that's the hardware and in some cases software that we put in the building. So we have confidence that we can deliver for the terms of the contract. And now, if mid-contract or at the end of the contract there's a new speed and upgrade or new requirements, even we can incorporate those. One of the new requirements, and it's not a speed requirement, it's Internet of Things, and we're working with a few partners. I think there's a couple of webinars coming on after this webinar to inform you on Internet of Things and how we're working with partners to integrate that into the next installs and setups that we do when customers require it. So we're always looking at the new technologies. We're always looking at how they fit with what we've got, and we always try and be, at the forefront, not the bleeding edge, but the leading edge. I think is the place to be.
Oh, definitely, I think that's really important. With what we were all involved in working, it's really important to be up to speed with what is not happening just now, but what's coming in the future, and making sure that how we work and how we deliver our services and can adapt and change with those requirements, both with what comes available and also really from what the end clients are demanding. It's them that are driving it forward, and it's all come on so far, we all know personally, from the last few years, and it will continue to drive on very quickly, I'm sure, with the requirements that people have. So I'm just going to give one final shout out to see if anyone else has any questions to ask at all. I think we've covered all of them that we've had come through so far. And just to give everyone a moment while we do that, I would just mention we have got another webinar coming up, which is on the 14th of September, which is the final one in the series. So we're giving everyone a little bit of a break over the holiday season that's coming up. And this one is making the Internet of Things work for you. So we'll be discussing that and looking at commercial advantages of combining the IoT into your building and designs as well. So we'll be looking at that in the future. And that is again at 10 a.m. on the 14th of September. So if you would like to register for that, please do via the website. And as we haven't had any other questions come in, I'll just say that if there's anything that you'd like any more information on about we've discussed today, please reach out to us, contact any member of the team. You can contact us via the website, or we're all on LinkedIn. So drop us a line on there, and we'll be happy to help in any way or follow up with any questions or discussions you'd like to have on anything we've talked about today. So yes, I'd like to thank both Adam and Pete for joining me this morning. I hope that everyone's found this helpful and insightful, and we'll look forward to the next webinar in a few weeks' time. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.